Good evening, everyone. Good evening. So glad to have you here. I'm Deshaun Drew. I'm the president of Minnesota Public Radio and the senior vice president of American Public Media Group, and was just so thrilled to have you here tonight. Very thrilled to be doing this event with our friends at the Bush Foundation. It's a great partnership to be able to bring you all together tonight to celebrate what we could be, who we could be to one another. John Powell's book is a powerful book, and I'm so thrilled that you all decided to take the time to come out and learn more about how maybe you can be part of the solution to the ills that we're suffering through these days. Bridging is a tool, not just a concept, and so we're going to hear a lot more about it tonight. I really just want to thank all of you for taking time. I checked, it's 21 degrees outside. You could be home. But there's work to be done. There's good work to be done, and we're glad to be in it with you. And I'm so pleased to have my dear friend, Jen Ford-Reedy, to my right, your left.
Thanks, Deshaun. Welcome, everybody. It is a delight to be up here with my dear friend Deshaun and to be here with all of you to get to spend some time listening to the wise and wonderful John Powell. I've been a fan of John's for a long time, but this particular book came out at a great moment for me, for us at Bush. It came out as we were challenging ourselves to think about what we needed to do, who we needed to be, to really make this region we serve a place that works well for everybody. And we'd have a long-standing commitment to equity, but we were realizing that we needed to have a lot more people to see themselves in, to connect with, to be willing to work toward a vision for the region where everybody belongs. And so we started an internal book club, and then we offered books to anyone else in the region who wanted to read along with us. And I'm delighted to say that we're approaching 10,000 books requested by folks. Which is just amazing. And it leads me to my first thanks of the night, which is to our partners at Black Garnet Books, who have managed every one of those orders. And they have a table here tonight giving out books to anyone who still needs one. And please thank them for all their effort in getting those book orders processed and out to folks. And that response to the book club offer led to this event tonight. And we're just so grateful to NPR and to the Fitzgerald Theater for putting on such a great event. Big hand for NPR and the Fitzgerald Theater. And I also want to thank some of our fellow foundations who were similarly having tough conversations internally about what's next in their work and who they wanted to be, and who have partnered with us in different ways for this event tonight, which includes Margaret A. Cargill Philanthropies, McKnight Foundation, Northwest Area Foundation, and our friends at Minnesota Council on Foundation. So big thanks to all those folks.
So we're going to get out of your way. Take what you learned tonight and share it with at least one more person in your life. We need this to be something that's more than just an academic study, right? We have to lean into the world we want to create. And without further ado, I'm happy to bring on Catherine Richard from NPR News and John A. Powell, author of The Power of Bridging.
Welcome. John, you can go ahead and have a seat here. Welcome to the beautiful Fitzgerald Theater in St. Paul. We're so grateful to the Bush Foundation and, of course, to NPR for making this discussion tonight possible. I'm Catherine Richard. I am a reporter and a host at NPR, and I'm very excited to have John with us today. John A. Powell is a scholar and advocate in the area of civil rights, structural racism, housing, constitutional law, democracy, and belonging, which is one of the topics we're going to be discussing tonight. He is the director of the Othering and Belonging Institute at the University of California, Berkeley. He has served as the executive director of the Kirwan Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity at The Ohio State University. You got to get that "the" in there. And he was founding director director of the Institute on Race and Poverty right here at the University of Minnesota. He's also served as the national legal director of the American Civil Liberties Union, where he was instrumental in developing educational adequacy theory. If you're here tonight, you've probably read John's 2024 book, The Power of Bridging: How to Build a World Where We All Belong. I find it a really excellent guide in helping me step outside of my comfort zone, both as a journalist, but also in my personal life, and better empathizing with people who might see the world differently than I do. And I don't think that I'm an expert bridger yet, but I'm thinking about it a lot, and I know John will have some really good advice for all of us tonight. Thank you so much for being with us, John.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So in the beginning of your book, you tell us a story from your childhood. And to set up this passage just a little bit that I'm going to have you read, you are 11 years old. You are a voracious reader. You were born into a very Christian family, and you were taught that only people baptized in your church would go to heaven, and yet you had read that most people in China were not Christian. You came to understand that people from China would not be accepted into heaven, and that concerned you. So one Sunday, very brave, young, 11-year-old John, his minister invites questions from the pews, and you raised your hand and asked, what's going to happen to the Chinese people? And I'll let you take it from there.
This was not what Brother Manuel, nor apparently the rest of the church, was expecting. He fumbled around for several minutes, flipping through his Bible to try to find some ideas that would help answer my question and assuage my concern. But all the verses he read as possible answer were vague and only made the situation worse. In the end, it was unfortunate, but it seems that all the Chinese people, including babies and children, including all the good people, for a reason there must be good people, even innocent people, people in China, will be going to hell. The doctrine of my father's church was not that one goes to heaven just for being good. One must be baptized and have one's sins washed away. Being good without this latter part does not address the problem of all people being born in sin. This was how I understood, and still do, the doctrine of the church I was raised in. That Sunday in church, a day that changed the trajectory of my life, Brother Manuel, after some frustration, dismissed my worries in the best way he knew how. Don't worry about it, he said. But I did not take his advice. My question was much more than just a worry. After that day, I never went back to church. That was the first of a number of profound breaks in my life. And the dynamics of what I call othering and belonging began to play out in a life where I had formerly only known belonging. I would go from being sheltered in a cocoon of belonging to being treated as other by the people in the community I loved the most.
Thank you. So, John, what happened next?
I wrote a book. That was hard. What's not included in the passages, it wasn't just a break from my family, it was, especially my father, because he's a Christian minister. But I also, at 11 years old, I was a believer. So I thought I was going to hell too. So it was a break from God as I had known up until that period. So the next couple of years, several years, were really hard, but I didn't have any choice. And eventually, I sort of started working things through and started on a different journey. And in some ways, I think that's the journey that I'm on now, the journey of what happens to the Chinese, what happens to everyone, what happens to life, what happens to ourselves. And eventually, it led me to a space where I believe we all belong and there's no other. And we have to live that way. We have to show up that way. And it's not easy. But that's the projection I believe that humanity has to be on if it is to thrive and survive.
So this seems like it was a very pivotal moment in your life and really set you on a trajectory going forward. I am wondering, are you still religious or spiritual in any way?
Good question.
Okay. Well, no comment?
one of the things, I'm not sure what either of those terms mean. How I think about it is, growing up in a traditional Christian church, the LeMay Church of Christ, it's very strict doctrines. It told you what to believe. There was the Bible, right? If you had any doubts, you went to the Bible for an answer. And there was an order. So I think of religion in that way, and that may be too narrow, but I think of religion as being very strict in some ways, very prescribed, telling you what to do, what not to do. Excuse me. In some ways, religion is about certainty. It's telling you how to behave, how not to behave. It's telling you what happens if you don't behave right. Tells you how to make it right. So in some ways, what religion does with uncertainty in life is takes it away. It gives you very clear answers. It couldn't give me an answer that day when I was 11. Spirituality to me is about searching where there are no clear answers. And there are no clear authorities. There's not a book that you can turn to and say, this is the answer to that spiritual question. So spirituality to me is about, in some ways, an open curiosity that maybe never ends, whereas religion is about a certainty that tends to close things down. Now, I think that that's partially right, but I also think it's partially wrong. And I don't want to, my book is about bridging.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering, do you feel like religion and bridging have some conflict? Is there some tension there?
Well, it's interesting. My dad, after some of you read the book or listened to it, my dad stopped speaking to me for about 5 years after that, except for to give orders for doing chores, which is hard because my dad, and a couple of you, I know, have some friends in the audience who met my dad. Just really the most loving person you could meet. So in a sense, my dad represents the best of bridging and spirituality. And if he didn't, my mom does. So actually in practice, even though the church was saying, don't do this, I didn't realize till later, excuse me, just how difficult it was for my dad. There wasn't something he was doing lightly. So I do think when you have a certainty, you're likely to have breaking. You're likely not to bridge. Certainty and purity is almost the opposite of bridging. In some ways, bridging, and I would even say spirituality, is curious. I want to know about you. But if I think I already know about you, and what I know about you is you're going to hell because you were not baptized, what else do I need to know? What kind of vegetables do you like on your way to hell?
Well, okay, that gets me to my next question. You lay out some of these key concepts in your book. Let's just do some quick definitions here, starting with othering and breaking. What do you mean by those terms?
Well, othering basically is not according another person full humanity and dignity. You think, and there are different ways of othering. There can be othering based on just indifference. I don't know about you. I'm not interested. I don't want to know about you. That's a kind of othering. It's a kind of invisible othering. Think of Ralph Ellison, Invisible Man. But there's also othering where you assume the other is a threat to your existence. Now you're obsessed with the other, and you make up stories about them. And so there's a different degree of othering. But both of them are predicated on the notion that the person does not belong in your world. The person is not accorded life concern in your world. You can take this person's life, you can segregate this person, you can take their resources. They don't have a right to vote, they don't have a right to speak, they don't have a right to be in your space. And it's your space, not their space. So that's othering. And breaking is how you do that. Breaking is when we break our relationship with the other. And we do that in part by telling stories about them. And the stories are flat, right? It's that when you deeply segregate, stereotype someone, we actually don't know that much about them. We just know the stories that we make up. And the stories are that they're bad people. They're threatening people. And sometimes we even say they're like animals or the insects. So that's othering. And again, there's a great gradation of othering. The more extreme and then the more minor. not minor in the sense that doesn't matter. So think about a society which says, I love my wife, but she could never be a lawyer because women can't be lawyers, which in many states was true until the beginning of the 20th century. That's still othering. But it's not the same kind of other when you say, these people don't deserve to be on the planet, let's commit genocide. Both of those are different kinds of othering, but both accord person less status, less dignity, less curiosity than belonging or bridging would.
Well, let's talk about those two terms. What do belonging and bridging look like?
A great question. Think about belonging is something that many of us experience and don't think about. It's like I compare it to some ways to love. Like most of us, many of us, hopefully all of us have had experienced love in our life with our family, growing up, maybe a loved one, friends. And we don't really try to define it. There's many different definitions. But when it's missing, we know it's missing. We know something's missing in our life. So belonging is really just recognizing that we're at home. There's a place for us, that someone cares, and we belong to each other. Interesting factoid. We're born literally, not figuratively, attached to another human being. We are connected. It's not a metaphor. We are connected. Indigenous people all over the world, but certainly here in the United States, acknowledge that humans are connected to the earth. So when they talk about Mother Earth, they're not talking in metaphorically. They're saying this is their mother. And so when we say, how much do you want for this land? It's like, he just offered to buy my mother. I mean, literally, you saw that in Hawaii. So in my family, there was no question of belonging. It was my family. People saw me, people got me, people cared about me. And I had a voice. So that's belonging. And I think we only thrive as human beings when we recognize, I think we all do belong. It's not a metaphor, but we don't recognize it. We only thrive when we recognize it, recognize we belong to each other, and recognize we belong to the earth.
So, as someone who thinks deeply about this all the time, how do you practice bridging in your personal life?
Well, the key word is practice. We have to give ourselves space not to be perfect, to make mistakes. I've done things and people say, John, that's not bridging.
You say, yes, it is.
Well, no, sometimes my answer is so. But I try to practice it, not just for the person, but for me. I call for people to not only engage in the practice of bridging, but also of being a bridger. That you think of this is who you are. Now, a good metaphor, again, I grew up in a Christian home, at least till I was 11. What does Christian mean? And excuse me for those of you who don't relate to Christianity or have some other faith. But the word Christian means Christ-like. So of the many, many Americans, or many, many people around the world, the 2-point-something billion people who call themselves Christian, which of them is really Christ-like? And really, my understanding is that it's an orientation. It's saying, I'm trying, I'm striving to become something. And so that's how I think about bridging, is that it's not that you ever get there. It's not that you've ever achieved it. It's a practice. It's a muscle, and that you keep learning from, and you get deeper and deeper.
So it feels like this is something that we can all do in our personal lives on an individual level, but we are living in a very fractured world right now. And I'm wondering, when it comes to the bigger picture, our communities, our states, our nation, what does that actually look like? What does it take? And is it beholden, or is it the responsibility of one group to be the bridger? Is it incumbent on one group to be the bridger?
Well, no, it's not incumbent on anyone to bridge. But I'm saying in terms of not only the question I get a lot, which is I think implicit in your question, is that if you're marginalized or if you're being abused, why should you be the bridger?
Right, yeah.
And again, part of it's orientation. It's like looking out at the world, and the world's looking back at you. You're connected to each other. We're connected to each other. And James Baldwin says, some of my countrymen find that fact inconvenient and even unfair, but none of us can do anything about it. We are connected to the earth. We may not like the fact that we're connected to the earth, and when we don't like the fact that we're connected to the earth, we abuse the earth. And then the earth abuses us because we're part of the earth. But a person has to come to this on their own. There's a story I tell about a woman named Loretta Ross. She's an African-American woman in her late 60s. She went back to school late. She was raped as a young woman. So she's a rape survivor. And she tells a story about someone writing her and saying, would you come visit me? I don't like myself. I hate myself. I want to kill myself. When I'm out in the world, I rape women. In prison, I rape men. I don't like myself. I hate myself. Would you come talk to me? And she went and talked to the person. And she spoke at one of our conferences. And someone asked her a question. But first you had to heal yourself, right? And she said, no. That the bridging is how you heal. You don't first heal, then bridge. You don't become perfect and, bodhisattva or Zen master and then bridge. Life is messy. You do this in life. And sometimes you can't do it. In fact, she said, I went to that prison, but before I went to that prison, I engaged in self-medication. I got high. So she's a human being. She has a lot of feelings. So I don't try to talk people into bridging. But I think to the extent that we don't bridge, to the extent that we don't see the humanity in others, we've actually narrowed our own humanity. You're not simply doing this for someone else. I think this is who we are. And we live in a world where people say, you don't belong. And I think we have to say, no, I do belong, and so do you. And so do you. And we have to not just say it, we have to build structures. We have to build institutions. We have to build stories that celebrate it. So it's not just individuals. We can do things. And what's hard right now is that many of the most powerful people in our country are telling other people they don't belong. Are saying, you're the wrong color. You love the wrong way. You're the wrong religion. You have an accent. And that's hurtful. But we don't want to mimic them. So I think that bridging is not something that's just for the rich or the powerful. It's something that actually is just part of being human.
Yeah. So in 2024, I worked on a reporting project called Talking Sense that was really aimed at helping our audience at NPR do some of the things that you write about, listen, ask curious questions, try to better understand people who saw specifically politics differently than they did. And I know as a journalist, I personally run into blind spots all the time, and that's part of the job. You're talking to people whose world is really different from yours. And it can be really challenging as a human and as a journalist. And I'm wondering have you had a moment where you really had a blind spot, and how did you sort of overcome that blind spot to be a bridger?
So we all have blind spots. That's the nature of the mind, and not just the human mind. Even dogs have blind spots. Monkeys have blind spots. Literally, if I don't know if you go to see an eye doctor, but you literally have a blind spot. It's not just a metaphor. It's beyond a metaphor. Which is one of the reasons that diversity is so important. Because different people have different blind spots. So we come together and talk, we sort of accommodate each other's blind spots. So the goal is not to actually get rid of your blind spots. That's a false goal. And I'm writing a new book about the Enlightenment. And the hubris of the Enlightenment was that science would at some point have a knowledge so thorough and complete, a light so bright, that there would be no blind spot, that we would know everything there was to be known. Sort of as a deviation. When Heisenberg came up with the uncertainty principle in 1928, I believe, he pissed people off. because the uncertainty principle was predicated on the notion that science would never know everything. There will always be uncertainty. And it's like, no,
That defeats the point.
So part of living life is living with uncertainty. So it's not getting away from it. And part of coming to terms with oneself is coming to terms with oneself not being perfect, having blind spots, having frailties, making mistakes, and yet being able to bridge, being able to love. And the thing that's interesting is that bridging is largely a heart event. Heart, H-E-A-R-T event. It's about feeling someone else. It's about acknowledging someone else, not because you agree with them. You think about a baby. We don't understand kids. We don't understand babies, but we love them to death. It's like, why? They just lay there,
Or they talk back.
They talk back. They don't,
Really good bridging opportunity there with your children.
Right. So when we're in the cognitive mind, we want to know, we want to be right. When we're in the heart space, we want to be in relationship. So part of it, and it's not saying I'm not against the cognitive mind, but bridging is about listening with the heart. And it doesn't mean you agree with someone. It doesn't mean you abandon your own values. It's just that you acknowledge that butterfly, right? This is beautiful. Butterfly's beautiful. What is it thinking? How the hell do I know?
Well, and I feel like so often people sort of conflate bridging with getting someone to agree with them, right? And it can be really hard when you're in a conversation with someone that you disagree with over anything.
That's right.
And so how do you belong and maintain a sense of self and maintain your values?
Well, the thing is there's an interesting nuance about bridging. Bridging is about empathetic, deep listening. Listening. It's not about agreeing. And listening to a person's story. And when you listen to people deeply, almost anyone will very quickly start telling you about their suffering. Compassion means to suffer with. So when you deeply listen and not try to persuade, you actually are more effective at persuading. So we work with organizers and they say, okay, so we need to listen in order to persuade. But if you're listening to persuade, you're not really bridging, right? But if you can listen deeply, for the person feel really seen, then they're persuaded. There's a South African word, which is sawubona. It means, I see you. It's a Zulu word. It's also been translated to mean, the divine in me sees the divine in you. When you do that, that's 95% of it. Children do better when they're seen. Old people do better. Young people, everyone. We all need to be seen. So, and we also need space to see ourselves, because sometimes we have internal conflict. So this is what I say to people. Bridging is hard. Don't start with the most difficult. If you've been laying on the couch for the last 6 months, scrolling on your phone, and you say, all right, tomorrow I'm going to run a marathon. And I'll say, no, you're not. You're going to hurt yourself. So start tomorrow by taking a walk around the block. And after a few weeks, go around the blocks 3 times. And then in 3 months, you might be running 4 miles. And maybe you'll get up to a marathon. So when we start to bridge, don't start with the most difficult. Don't start with the person, that you think of as your polar opposite. Start with your brother that you haven't talked to because he took your vase and never returned it. We call those short bridges.
Yeah. If you're just joining us, I'm Catherine Richert, and you're listening to scholar and author John A. Powell, who is with me tonight at the Fitzgerald Theater in St. Paul. Thank you to the Bush Foundation and to Minnesota Public Radio for making this event happen. So, John, I want to talk about stories. You write in your book about the danger of reducing someone to a single narrative or a community to a single narrative. Why is that so dangerous and working against bridging?
Well, first of all, it's when we reduce someone to a single narrative, there's another word for it. It's called stereotyping. We know all of ourselves. We know we're complex beings. We don't think of other people, and we certainly don't think of those that we stereotype as being complex. When you deeply other someone, something happens. Nature arranged it so that when we see another human being, there's a part of the brain that lights out. We're not exactly sure what it's doing, but we're recognizing another human being. When we deeply other someone, that part of the brain does not light up. When we reduce someone to a single thing, they become non-human. And just an example, they've done this experiment where they have people looking at homeless people who are unhoused, and that part of the brain that lights up when they see another human being is quiet. And other parts of the brain, disgust, filth, is active. And then they say, that homeless woman, what kind of vegetables does she like? And that part of the brain lights up.
What kind of music does she enjoy listening to?
What kind of music?
Yeah.
It's like homeless people like music? Homeless people like vegetables? Never thought of that. We've reduced them to a single thing. When you reduce them to a single thing, you reduce their humanity. Also, you mean, what we do in politics is like, that person is pro-choice, that person is pro-life. That's it. That's it. That's it. We're so much more than any single thing.
And politicians use that to put us into our own silos as voters.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So, and I have friends. My friends think of me, as most of them, as progressive or confusing. Sometimes.
I like confusing. That's good.
Exactly. And they'll say, why are you friends? I have a friend here from Utah, and she knows, why are you friends with Arthur Brooks? He's head of the, very conservative, he was head of a very conservative think tank. And I don't just like Arthur Brooks, I love Arthur Brooks.
How did you two meet? But tell us the story.
Excuse me?
How did you and Arthur meet?
We met, people brought us together to talk about free speech. And I thought, I agree with a lot of what he said. And he's a capitalist, he's a conservative, but he's not a single thing. He's also a musician, he cares about people deeply. He's complicated. And part of it was the space to actually look at his complexity. And when you have complex relationship with people, the opportunities for bridging, the opportunities for connection multiply. If you have a single thing, that's it. You get one shot at it. And so when we reduce, and we don't like to be ourselves reduced to a single thing. We say, I'm not in a box. You can't put me in a box. So everybody else in a box except you. So anyway, it just means that we're cutting people off. We're not, part of bridging is being curious about people. Asking people what they feel, asking people what they're afraid of, asking people why they have feelings differently than you. We're situated differently. If we think we already know, we don't ask. So knowledge in some ways, thinking you know, having certainty, is a lack of curiosity. So
you said people have asked you questions about this particular relationship with someone who's conservative. And I think one thing I've come across a lot in my own reporting is this isn't a helpful exercise right now. Why should I bridge political divides when the most powerful people in the country are using rhetoric, for instance, that's very divisive? Have you gotten any flack from people for continuing to talk about this in a moment where a lot of people feel really marginalized?
Certainly, and to some extent, it's, I would say it was worse now, because the thing is if you only talk to your, there's a line from a Leonard Cohen song which says, you who leave everything that you cannot control, it starts with your family, but soon comes around to your soul. So we end up having smaller and smaller groups. We don't like this person, we don't like that person, we don't like, and pretty soon it's like we're isolated, and that's what's happening. So there's some good news about all the othering and breaking that's going on. And the good news is the research suggests that almost all of it's happening in the name of belonging. I'll just let that sink in for a minute. That people actually other people in order to belong. So I'll other the people over here so I can belong over here. People need to belong. Now, if you're saying people are throwing stuff at us, so what should we do? Should we throw stuff back at them? You know, that old thing of, you know, King said, the Reverend Dr. King said, an eye for an eye leaves everybody blind. You know, so is that what we want? We want to mimic the very people, what Amanda Ripley calls conflict entrepreneurs, people who thrive on hate, people who thrive on division. We're going to mimic them, or are we going to tell a different story? Are we going to tell a story that everyone matters, everyone's concerned, but people are situated differently? And bridging is not something you do on a beautiful sunny day when it's 72 degrees and there's no wind and you're sitting by the lake in Minnesota. That day doesn't exist, so just once a year, right? What do you do during the Civil War? Lincoln, in my mind, was one of the great bridgers in our country. And I share this, right? He went to Gettysburg. 51,000 people had died in Gettysburg. Still one of the largest battles, if not the largest battle in U.S. history. He's the commander-in-chief. And he gives the Gettysburg Address and a series of other addresses bridging. Not saying, yeah, we got him on the run, let's keep going. In one of his speeches, he talked about malice toward none. During the Civil War, how do you mean malice toward none? The country is tearing itself apart. And he's in charge of at least half the country, but he's constantly trying to reach out. So the thing for me it's really important to remember is that bridging is not something you do just on a sunny afternoon. King comes home in early 1950s, comes home, he's delayed at church. He comes home, his house has been blown up. There are 1,000 people there saying, we got to get these people who did this. And he says, no, we don't. We need to bridge. And we think of King as one of the most effective leaders of the 20th century. We think of Lincoln as one of the most effective presidents in U.S. history. And both of them, not perfectly either one of them, but both of them was building on bridging, not building on hate.
So going back to what you said earlier about just kind of the constant messaging that you don't belong and how that drives us further into our silos, I can't help but think about the role that media plays in doing that. How do you feel like media might contribute to these divisions, and what could we be doing better?
Well, media is really important. And, you know, I live in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, and people used to think that the internet and Facebook was going to bring everybody together. It didn't do that. And in fact, what it did was make some people super rich. So now we're talking about people becoming trillionaires. And how does it make people super rich? It traded on the lizard brain. So we think of humans largely as being rational animals. At least we think of ourselves as being rational animals, but not necessarily the other humans. But the fear part of the brain is largely not controlled, but influenced by something called the amygdala, which is the lizard brain. And what the lizard brain does is really get active when we are fearful. And we're in a highly fearful space. And, you know, it used to be, they used to say, if it bleeds, it leads. They're saying if you tell something gory, scary, people it's like, oh my God, what's the rest of that story?
Well, stories about people getting along are not as exciting.
Well, not necessarily.
Maybe to us it is. But.
So two things I think we have to learn to do. We have to learn to talk to the lizard. We have to learn lizard language. The lizard is not rational. The lizard does not check footnotes. The lizard does not cite checking. So when people get confused, right? They say, he just lied, and people's like, who cares? He makes me feel good, right? So how do we tell stories that acknowledge the lizard? Fear is not a bad thing. Fear is, by some accounts, the oldest emotion, and we need not be afraid of fear. But we also can tell stories that are positive and uplifting, that are fun. Many of our uplifting stories are boring.
Yeah.
And so I say, how do we tell stories that are uplifting, that are fun? And someone says, give me an example. We can't even think of examples anymore. And I said, do you ever look at Pixar movies? How many of you saw Inside Out?
Yeah.
I teach the mind science, how the mind works. It's incredibly complicated. And they turn this into a movie that, 12-year-olds are giggling and laughing. It's like, you're looking at mind science stuff, don't you? So how do we do both? So I think we can be better at connecting with each other. We're going to have to deal with the fact of fear. We're going to have to help people deal with fear. And it's easy right now, the way we help people deal with fear is we point to the object of fear, as opposed to saying, you don't need to be afraid. So yes, social media could help us, but I don't think in the short run it will.
Yeah. So you mentioned you live in California, but you also, when I met you over dinner earlier, you mentioned that it was real cold here, like you'd never been here before, but you have a long history with Minnesota.
Yeah.
You seem surprised. Tell us more about your time in this state.
Well, I lived here for 10 years. I taught at the University of Minnesota, and I started the Institute on Race and Poverty. Got to hang out with cool people like Alan Page, because I lived in this neighborhood. He didn't really hang out with me, though. I just said that. Keith Ellison, I did hang out with Keith. But anyway, I liked Minnesota. And in fact, when I left here, I started the Institute on Race and Poverty, and I felt like we did some good work, and I felt like the work had to be national and maybe even global. In Minnesota at the time, the University of Minnesota didn't want to be national. And I said, the work is national. You can't deal with these problems just on a local level. And that's what the split was, which is why I left. But when I left, it wasn't a knock on Minnesota. I kept my house because I thought I'd come back. I kept it for 10 years and was a little sad when I sold it. My son and I used to hang out in the house together. I was in the role of a single dad. Still have a lot of good friends here. Some of them are here now. Some of them just visited me. And I said this about New York, but it's also true about Minnesota, Minneapolis, St. Paul. It's a good place to visit. It's a great place to live. When I visit here now, I don't have the right shoes.
Right. Did you bring gloves?
I bring gloves. I don't know what to do with them. And it's like I'm too hot, I'm too cold, I'm too hot, I'm too cold. But if I lived here, I'd manage that. So I like Minnesota a lot, actually. And some things were confusing to me, including, frankly, the killing of George Floyd.
Well, I was going to ask you about this because I'm sure that you follow these news events very closely. We also, of course, had the tragic politically motivated assassination of former House Speaker Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark this summer. How do communities bounce back from events like that when so much trust has been eroded?
Well, the thing that Minnesota had going for it then and has going for it now. So first I should just say, Minnesota Public Radio, Bush Foundation. I mean, Bush Foundation, what you did with my book, I just want to thank you. Institutes and leadership matters. And Minnesota, in my mind, has always had more than its fair share. The last several years, I'm working too hard. I'm getting off of boards. And, Tanya Allen calls me up in McKnight and said, will you be on our board? I said, yes. So this is what you have. You have incredible, incredible institutions and incredible leaders, and you have problems. But if those leaders and institutions step into those problems, they can be solved. And to do it in a way so that, you're going to learn, you're going to make mistakes, but do it in a way that invite people in, then I think Minnesota can not only do things for the region, but for the whole country. And I think what the Bush Foundation did, without overblowing it with my book, is a way of saying, here is something positive. You don't have to buy it, we'll give it to you. I hope you made them read it, though, at least. But I think that's, and continuing to do things positive, continuing to, I've already quoted him once, I'll do it again. James Baldwin said, not every problem that we face can we solve, but we can't solve any problem unless we face it. And so I feel like you have the infrastructure here, you have the people here, you have the goodwill here, and you have the resources here to face many problems. And I'm hopeful, and one reason I like coming back here, groups like Isaiah, you're doing just that. So
there's hope for us here.
Yeah, there's hope, although just I don't organize around hope. People ask me, am I hopeful? And I said, I'm not an optimist or a pessimist, I'm a possibilist. Being a possibilist means what we do matter. It's our engagement that matters. I don't want people sitting around thinking that things will get better. There are no things out there, it's us. If it gets better, it's because we put our shoulders to the wheel and experiment it. And I hope all of you become bridgers. Probably most of you already are, but I'm not despairing.
Yeah. So an important part of your work that you've done here and elsewhere is with civil rights and addressing how racism is built into our, societal structures. I also know from speaking with you that you're pretty adamant about not building silos around race. How do you think about all of those things at once?
Well, the simple thing is, race is incredibly complex. It's like almost no one really understands it, but it's constantly shifting. I travel around the world. I've lived in India. My oldest daughter was born in Tanzania. And the reason it's the Othering and Belonging Institute and not a racial justice institute is that the way we other people at an institutional level varies as we move across the world. And we all have experienced being othered. And in some ways that's good because it means there's something there that we can work with. And, we've learned a lot. So, when Senator Obama was running for president, and I knew him before he was Senator Obama, I thought, this is not going to happen. I was wrong. So part of the thing is that our imagination allows us to see things that are not there. It allows us to dream. Not dream in terms of sleep, but dream in terms of creating new possibilities. And there's in another book I wrote, I talk about the cognitive revolution. Many scientists, biologists, historians say humans, not humans, but Homo sapiens' greatest strength is our ability to collaborate. And we do that through telling stories and imagining. And we couldn't always do that. We only started doing that about 70,000 years ago. And we started telling more and more complex stories that brought in more and more people. And we're not done. But we're not trapped in a particular story. We're not trapped in this story. That would be a shame. They say, if you find yourself going through hell, keep going. Don't stop. So I think we can tell better stories. We can do better practice. We can, and while we're doing it, not after we've won, not after the by and by, today, we can care about each other. We can love each other. We can acknowledge each other. I think we can do that tonight, today. We're already doing it. So to me, that's part of that's not, if I was going to use something that was hopeful, that's what I would give.
And I think we have to be more comfortable with receiving stories that might be counterintuitive or not totally make sense to us.
I think that's right. And the other thing I would say, in another book I wrote, I have a chapter in there, and you can get this chapter online. You don't have to buy the book. It's called Lessons from Suffering. And I look at the great religions, and I notice that almost all of them are organized around suffering. But suffering was a great teacher. It wasn't just something to be avoided, something to run away from. And I feel like there's lessons in suffering that we miss because we don't have the intimacy with suffering. And I know this may sound a little strange. So I think our ability to care about each other, our ability to love, and our ability even to suffer together is where our hope really lies.
And I think it's fun to be surprised by people, right? I mean, that's sort of the delight. That's the fun in the stories.
Well, people are some of my favorite animals. But I have other favorite animals too. And so during COVID, literally friends would say to me, quick story, they'd say, "Are you worried?" My oldest daughter was very concerned. She said, "You're still going out, you got to stop. You have all the markers of someone who will die from COVID. You're old, you're a man, you're black, stop. And I said to her, it's a serious conversation. I said, I enjoy life, so I'm not trying to get out of here. But if I were to die, I wouldn't be disappointed. If I was to get COVID, which I did, I wouldn't be disappointed. But if life on the planet as we know it, as humans as we know it, stopped, I'd be extremely distraught. Extremely distraught. I mean, this is a beautiful, beautiful planet. And so I feel, so people say, how did you keep your spirits up during the middle of COVID?
How did you?
Two things. One, I live in a garden. I live in the lower Berkeley Hills, next to something called Indian Rock. I walk outside, and there are hummingbirds and butterflies. And I'm not making this up. And that's where I live. And then I go for a walk in the trees, and the earth really enjoyed COVID.
Yeah, people were appreciating it for once.
People were kind of,
Look at that tree.
People were, a lot of people were suffering, and there was a lot of suffering. But the earth had a chance to heal for a minute. So I think there's joy all around us. We don't have to wait for something else. And one of the great, 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 great gifts I got from my parents, we were lower income, living in Detroit. My parents were sharecroppers. But they had so much gratitude. They had so much love. And as I've gotten older, I feel like that's the incredible gift. It's not the gift of something. It's the gift of enjoying what you have. I just came from Detroit. My friend Tanya Allen came to visit. We still, since the 1960s, every Thanksgiving, we get together. And I had friends from Minnesota come visit. It's just so much love. That's and you still might have house payments to struggle with. You still may be in a fight with someone, but for that period, just to be thankful. So anyway, I feel really lucky. If my father was here, I'd say I feel blessed.
Okay, we'll do a couple more questions here, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. John, I'm wondering, if you could tell us about a place where you feel like you belong and that your bridges are really strong.
What was the second part?
What's one place where you feel like you belong and those bridges are strong?
Well, I feel like I belong. Like Margaret Mead, I don't know, it's this famous debate between Margaret Mead and James Baldwin, and Margaret Mead asked Baldwin where he belonged, and he said, no place. He says, as a gay black man, I have no home. And she said to Margaret Mead, where do you belong? And she said, as a rich white woman, everywhere. So I'm not claiming to be a rich white woman, but I belong a lot of places.
Good. That's great.
I feel very fortunate. I've had an incredible life, and it's still going. I have incredible friends. And I oftentimes say, when people say, is this the journey or is it the destination? And I say, it's the company you keep. And I have some great company, including all of you. So I feel pretty good most places, most of the time. Now, that wasn't always true.
Even when it's 10 degrees outside in Minnesota?
No,
Yeah, okay.
I don't feel...
You're thinking about your garden back in Berkeley, I understand. So, John, this is my last question. I couldn't help myself. As I was typing up my notes for tonight, my computer really wanted to capitalize your name. I'm sure your computer has been well-trained at this point, but can you tell us what your decision was, why you decided not to capitalize your name?
Yes, and I want you to think, after I tell you this, why do you capitalize your name?
Because society tells us we must.
Yeah, right. So, you know, when I was a teenager, I don't know, 12, 13, first of all, my father on my mother's side, my mother's father was Native American, and I was named after him. And then when I was about 12 or 13, you know, it's like, why am I carrying this slave name? So I decided to change my name. My grandfather had passed, and I'd mentioned it to my mom that I was going to change my name maybe to an African name to relate to my ancestors. And she was not happy. And it struck me that, you know, even as a, you know, teenager full of piss and vinegar, that I was going to piss off my parents to relate to my ancestors. Something was odd about that. And I was reading E. Cummings, and then also it was the first time that I was really becoming conscious of the fact that we shouldn't be over the universe. And I felt like capitalizing letters was an expression of being separate and over the universe, and that if we're in relationship with the universe, we would not capitalize our name. That we're part of the universe. So I went to my mom and I said, what if I dropped the caps? And she said, I don't care about that. I said, okay, fine.
What a nice compromise. There you go.
We did some bridging.
John, it's been a pleasure to talk with you. We're going to take some audience questions now, but first, can we please give John a round of applause? Okay, we'll bring the lights up so we can see who we're talking to here. All right, Kelly? Go ahead. Yeah, raise your hand.
Thanks for coming tonight. I've heard people talk about sitting across the table from someone that they really want to bridge with, but there are a lot of walls, and they will try and be curious. They will try and do what they can to build that bridge, but that person won't have it. And I didn't know if you had any advice for those situations.
Yeah, John, how do you bridge when the person you want to bridge with doesn't want to bridge with you?
You don't. So bridging is more of like a space. You know, it's like, I don't know, you know, when I was a kid, you want to go to the prom with this woman, a girl, and she says, no, you don't go with her. It's the end of the story. But you can be open. And so bridging is not forcing someone else to do something. It's being in a space yourself. It's being curious about people. And there'll be certain conditions where you can't bridge. I was talking to some people from Palestine, and they were saying, how do you bridge when bombs are falling? I said, you don't. You know, this is not something you do all the time. This is real stuff. And so Dr. King, someone asked him about the segregationists. Excuse me. I said, what do you do with the segregationists? And he said, I leave the door open and I leave the light on. But I don't go chasing them. If they don't want to be with me, I'm not going to go chasing after them. But the light is on and the door is open. So what you can do is create a space and say to someone, the light is on, the door is open. And if you're open to bridging, I'm open to. And most people are. The vast majority of people want to tell their story. But if they don't, you know, you have to let it go, at least for that time.
Hello.
Where are you?
Up here.
Oh, okay.
Hey.
Hello.
I'm wondering if you could tell us about the most surprising instance of bridging for yourself.
I mean, there are many. So I'm walking down the streets in Northern California, and I see these three guys who are about my age, and they're panhandling. And they asked, like, do you have any money to me? And I said, no, I'm sort of hard on my luck right now. And they turned, they said, well, we don't have much, but we can share with you. And they pick up their thing that they're panhandling with, and they offer it to me. So it's a related story. I'm living in San Francisco, and there's a woman that I normally support, give her $5, $10 when I see her. And she's homeless or unhoused, however you say it. And I've been traveling, and I'm returning from out of town, and I see a friend, and this woman, I'm going to say her name is Mabel. Mabel is watching. I see a friend, and I see the friends, we run hugs. Oh, you back in town? And she's hugging, and I'm hugging her, and then she walks away. And then I turn around, and there's Mabel. And I said, Mabel, so what do you need today? Do you need some money for food or something? And Mabel was, like I said, unhoused. She's probably 300 pounds, soiled, urine on our garments. And she looks down, and I said, is everything okay? She said, I said, do you need $5, $10? And she said, I was wondering if I could have a hug. And I hesitated. But then I hugged her. And to me, that was a surprise, but it was also a gift. I had to deal with my own biases. And I was more than willing to give her money. But for what I was willing to give her, what she really needed was human contact. And I hesitated. So that was, like I said, a surprise and a gift.
Sorry, can I go?
Okay.
We'll go you, and then we'll go you.
Okay.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, so I really like your concept of bridging. I love to get into the book and read about it. But the biggest movement I've heard in the last year is the No Kings marches, and I don't know how that relates to bridging.
So I'm not sure either. But it can be. Bridging is not tip it. It's not without power. I took a group of people to not China, but to India to try to see if we're looking to see if our goal is to try to create a world, try to create space in the world where there's belonging without othering. So we went to India for that effort. And it was nice. It was more than nice. The Indian people who greeted us was like, about time you guys figured this stuff out. We've been doing this for a while. And what they were saying is that Gandhi was about bridging. Gandhi was about belonging. Now, the No Kings March is huge, but it wasn't larger than the millions and millions and millions of people that Gandhi put on in India, at the time opposing the most powerful empire in the history of humankind. And he's, by some success, he had some success. Now, saying that he was trying to end colonialism, that he's trying to end imperialism, but he's also trying to build belonging. Those two things are not contradictory. In fact, I think just the opposite. Sometimes people say to me, and I did this when I was younger, they say, remember when we were kings and queens in Africa? And I have to say, no. I know there are kings and queens in Africa. I know there were emperors. But that wasn't me. The vast majority of people were enslaved. I oppose that. I work with largest companies in the world. I've worked with Google. I've worked with Apple, and I talk to them about the stuff we're talking about right now. But before I do that, I say, please read my stuff, because I don't want you to be surprised, that I'm doing this thing with you, and then say, this is what John has to say about corporations. And I have a piece. You can look it up, or I'll send it. I say corporations are misaligned, but it doesn't mean I'm going to attack Sundar, who's the head of Google, personally, if I think what he's doing is harmful to the planet, to people, I'll say that. But it's not out of spite. It's not saying he's not human. I had one address then, and I said, everyone belongs. Everyone's inside the circle of human concern. And someone said, what about the Koch brothers? I said, yeah, both of them. So it's not a contradiction at all. Now, how you conduct yourself and what you do can make it a tension, but there's no tension of saying, I don't want a king, I don't want an emperor, and I don't want to be king or emperor. To me, that's the opposite of belonging. It's not saying, so I don't think that's necessarily a problem. I don't know if belonging and bridging was part of that, but there's no reason for it not to be.
Can you please speak to what you would say it looks like to do internal bridging? So the parts of yourself that you may other consciously or unconsciously.
That's a good question.
It's a great question. I'm throwing out a few names. I do teach, so, at Berkeley, so I have to do this. But some of you may know John Rawls. John Rawls was, by some account, the most important political writer for Western society in the 20th century. He wrote a book called Theory of Justice. He talked about diversity being an internal and external activity. By that, he meant that we all carry diverse sites in ourselves. And sometimes those sites are in tension. And I've written an article about that as well, called talking about the multiple selves. So what do you do when the multiple selves don't cohere? We've seen that in the extreme, for example, when a society is casting dispersions on someone for their sexuality. You see someone going oftentimes sort of an internal fight. So part of bridging and part of not demanding perfection is to be kind to yourself. And it could be a big drop off or a little one. You said you're going to exercise every day in the new year, and you didn't. Okay. But you're still okay. So yes, part of bridging. So in a really healthy society, not only do we see the multiplicity in each other, we see the multiplicity within ourselves. We're not the same as we were 5 years ago, 5 days ago. How do we let those things come up? And the reason sometimes we don't know about those things is we suppress them. I don't like this about myself, so I'm not going to allow that to come to consciousness. That's a whole different psychological thing. But yes, bridging is an internal and an external phenomena. And multiplicity is both internal and external. One of the things that's actually sad about the way we do race and the way we do these is we assume that race is, that you're this one thing. You're this one thing. And, sometimes I realized at some point that if my 20-year-old self had met my 60-year-old self, my 20-year-old self would not have liked my 60-year-old self. My 60-year-old self would have been fine with my 20-year-old self, but not the other way around. So part of it is, again, creating space where we can actually accept all aspects of ourselves.
Hi, up here in the nosebleeds. John, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your insights tonight. I think the response you just gave is a perfect segue to the question that I'm holding, and I'm wondering whether or not, or the extent to which, one's self-awareness affects the effectiveness of their bridging.
One's self-awareness what?
Affects their ability to bridge effectively?
It's a great question, a complicated question. And so I lived in India for a while. And what I learned, in part, I met really wonderful people, wonderful teachers, and I had what people might call a spiritual epiphany. But I studied with the Buddhist teacher, Goenka, And part of the teaching was no self-awareness, right? And what one strand of Buddhism is that there's no permanent self. Going back to the previous question, as you suggested. So it's not self-awareness, there's no self-awareness. Being aware that the self is a composite and is constantly changing. And I think embedded in your question is, does that create more space for bridging? Yes, with yourself and with others. So sometimes, for example, we say, how do we create common ground? That's a good exercise. A different exercise is, how do we create common ground? How do we create space to bridge? So yes, and I think from my perspective, realizing the self is not permanent creates many, many more opportunities to bridge, both with oneself and with the other.
We have one back here.
Hello, Mr. Powell. Thank you very much. When my daughter invited me here, I didn't know what I was coming to. But I can tell you this. I deeply appreciate you because your spirit, you don't come off like a bitter man. You know, you're just talking about life. And in my mind, I pondered, a better world. A perfect world. I pondered that in my mind, and I even tried to write a story about that. And I'm looking at you talking about bridging where we can all get along. And what I found in my study was that the most difficult thing that I ran into was what it takes to be a human being. Because what makes us unique, and you talked about, color, race, you use the word race, but what really makes us unique is that we're individuals. And then so when you're trying to bridge that gap with individuals, I'm just curious to how do you explain how do we all really get along without rules, or are we going to have rules, and then who enforces the rules, the laws, to help us get to that certain point? Because there has to be an ultimate standard that we're trying to achieve, or that you're trying to achieve in the book, I'm assuming, to get to us all getting along and being tolerant of everybody. How does that actually work in a real world, and that's the world we're in? How does that actually work? I'm just curious.
Okay, thank you for the question. So I think I deal with some of that, maybe not all of it, but some of it, in a book I wrote called Racing to Justice. And I'm writing a new book now on the Enlightenment. I think our concept of the individual is deeply, deeply, deeply flawed. It's a trap. And it actually comes from the idea of the atom being indivisible. Of course, turns out that's wrong. Similarly, the concept of the individual has become deeply part of Western society, particularly Anglo-American Western society, is deeply flawed. We only exist in relationship with each other. So again, I start from the predicate that we already belong. We're already connected to each other. We don't have to do anything about that. We have to just stop acting up. And it's, in a sense, I'm saying that's the real world. The world of, think about this. The United States for decades, almost 100 years, had formal segregation as part of its code. It outlawed interracial marriage. And people still got married. And the case that went to the Supreme Court in the 1960s was beautiful. You couldn't make this stuff up. The couple's name was Loving, right? They went to jail more than once just trying to live their life loving each other, right? It was the real world. It's not artificial, but we had these rules saying, nope, nope, can't do it, can't do it. And then we say, you got to stay in this community. The same thing true in South Africa, apartheid. Black people, stay over there, different tribes stay over there. So we have these rules to try to pull us apart. I grew up in Detroit, Motown, but I also remember Chuck Berry. Do any of you remember Chuck Berry? They said he was dangerous because when he played his music, black people and white people got together. I'm not making this up. They arranged to have him jailed because he was so dangerous. So I do believe, not that this is just real, but also I think it's powerful. And we don't have to put it off. You don't need permission to care about each other, to love each other. Just do it. And that is life. To me, it's not like, then we can live. No, that is life. But starting with the notion that, like I said, the individual, as propagated in Western society, especially Anglo-American, just doesn't exist. That's the unreal. The idea that there's something separate from everything else. The self-made man doesn't exist. Well, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, I better get up and change my diaper. I think I soiled myself. It doesn't work that way. Yeah. It doesn't work that way.
We have time for one more question here. We'll go ahead.
John, thank you for your enlightenment. My name is Wally Legbede, president of the Rochester
From
branch
Rochester.
of the NAACP. We have a lot of Rochester peeps here.
Welcome.
My question is, as you've traveled around the world, you've mentioned India, you've talked about South Africa, Tanzania. What are some of the lessons that we can get from the world that can really help us here in this country in terms of how do we belong? So, from your perspective.
That's really, again, sort of a fascinating question. I mean, I think we're heading in the wrong direction. That's pretty obvious, I think, to me at least. We're trying to close ourselves off from the world right now. We're building walls instead of bridges. And I was talking to Deshaun earlier about the Dark Ages. We've done that before. There's been a period of time where we cut ourselves off. All of a sudden, it goes dark. We're not learning anything anymore. Because learning is a group sport. It's interacting with other people. So the first thing is just to listen to other people, engage other people. Everybody has something to contribute. Once I think, no, I don't want to hear about what anyone else has to say, I'm in trouble. I went to Tanzania to do a postgraduate fellowship in human rights because I was interested in human rights. But I want to say, okay, I know what we, more or less, Americans think about human rights, but what do Tanzanians think about human rights? Turns out I didn't have a clue, right? I have a student at Berkeley. He just got his PhD in world philosophy. I said, that's great. It's a great school. You got a PhD in world philosophy. So what did you learn about Confucianism? He said, nothing. I said, well, why do you call it world philosophy? 60% of the world moral code is based on Confucius. 60%. They don't talk about sin in Confucianism. That struggle I had in my church wouldn't have happened if I'd have been in China. I'm saying all these Americans born in sin, they just said, what is sin? Right? That's a Western concept. Most Americans or most Westerners don't realize this Western concept. They think it's a global concept. It's just natural. Everybody, and I was a kid, they say, that TV commercial, right? They say, you only go around once in life, so grab it while you can. I said, what if you're Hindu? Well, you can relax because you have 4 more times to go around. So we have a lot to learn if we open. We're not open right now, but I think the world is getting smaller. I think we have to have some realignments. I think things keep changing. They always have. Nation states are only like 300 years old, 400 years old. This is a new experiment that maybe, I'll end by this. I'm probably going to spend next summer in Europe. They've invited me to come over and give me a fellowship. And I'll probably take it, right? Because I want to do exactly what you said. It's like they're looking at the world, but they're looking at it differently than we are. I want to know how they are actually thinking about these problems. But here's one example. So Europe was having wars every 5 minutes, and the two major culprits in these every 5-minute wars was Germany and France. And if you go back and look at the literature, people explain it in terms of these are different races. They're not just white people. There's the Germans and the French thought of each other as different races. They're the other. And so they naturally, this is the story they were telling each other, they naturally had to fight each other. World War I, World War II. At the end of World War II, they got together and said, can we do something different? And out of that question came the EU. The EU is over 30 countries, including Germany and France, where they now have a shared currency. They have a porous border. If you're in France, you can go to school in Germany. If you're in Germany, you can go to school in France. You can work in either country. The euro, you spend it in Germany, you spend it in France. That was completely unthinkable before World War II. Germany and France cooperating? Are you kidding me? So part of it is that, and it's not perfect, they have their problems, but they're trying to actually create space where they have different kinds of bridges. It's back to your earlier question, where they create a structure, they create a container that says, we all belong. Now, some people are critical. They say they all belong if you're European, but if you're not European, then you don't belong. So they haven't. In fact, if you look at history, and then I'll end by this, every major religion and every major philosophy from time immemorial has been built around belonging. Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, they all are built around belonging. But with this caveat, it's belonging with othering. It's belonging with othering. So if you're Jewish, you're the chosen people. What about the non-chosen people? Well, they're kind of screwed, right? So from my perspective, our challenge as the world has gotten smaller and smaller is to actually acknowledge that everyone belongs. It doesn't mean everyone's the same. Belonging is not the same as saming. It's listening to people. It's learning from people. It's having people bring what they learn to the table. And so the good news is it's already happening. And so now, if you go to London, you can actually eat good food.
Well, on that note, John, it's been a pleasure. Once again, thank you so much. We appreciate you coming here tonight.
Thank you.